Our final unit will be considering two topics: reproductive technologies and the science of love. Thinking in terms of where we've been so far with this course, we started Unit 1 discussing theories. And Unit 2, while we were considering sexual orientation and gender identity, we did that using the framework of history and socio-political issues. Unit 3 was a discussion of social institutions. And now, Unit 4, our final unit, has an overall perspective of social change and the self. We'll be considering reproductive technologies and how that impacts both our behaviors and our social arrangements. And finally, when we talk about love and lust, I'm hoping that will give students the chance to introspect a bit, to think more about themselves and those around them, and also to think a little more about how science and the social analysis can both inform us about our own human sexuality. We'll be talking about reproductive technologies in this session, and I want to create a framework for your thinking about that. I want you to think about how technology creates opportunities for us to do things differently, and how by doing things differently, this then directly affects not only our norms and roles in society, and I think you've gotten this by now, talking about the changing roles of women, or how the norms regarding gender-based behaviors may have changed in the last 50 years. But I also want you to understand that technology affects social organization in a very broad manner. So to explain this, I want you to think about the most basic type of society that has existed over human history. We live in a post-industrial age society, sometimes referred to as the information age. To understand what that means is that society is organized more around the exchange of information and less around just producing goods, and that would be what an industrial society is, one that produces goods or is focused and organized around producing goods. If you were to go back into human history, the first societies would be hunter-gatherer societies. Those are low levels of technology. What kinds of technologies they would have, things like fire, rudimentary weapons, shelter, ways of moving things such as packs or sleds. Then the next level of society would be agrarian, which is based on agricultural and pastoral technologies. That allows for raising food, creating a surplus, which is difficult in a hunter-gatherer society. It's hard to create a surplus when you're always on the move or when you're dependent on finding animals for food or what kind of foods just the natural seasons yield. So, agricultural and pastoral technologies, when those are employed, there's at least a little bit of leisure time when the surplus is created. You've got a surplus, then you can rest a little bit. You can do other things. So the surplus means that humans can focus on their thoughts too, so they start to create more culture, and a higher level of culture starts to emerge. The next level of technology is industrial, and that means that humans figure out how to harness energy, whether it be coal, steam, or electricity, so that mass production of goods can be achieved. This then gives rise to the big cities. But the basic idea here is that technology drives the basic organization of society. And opportunities to do things differently will change human behaviors in some ways. Those technologies give you new opportunities and new ways of doing things. And then consider too that reproduction may be a very strong human drive. So we now have new ways of doing things that are not only very basic to our existence, but also where there may be some strong drives associated with behavior. It's an interesting place to think about social change. Thinking in terms of the family, and that it is a primary place of socialization, we now have a basic social institution whose structure now is challenged somewhat by changing technologies. We not only have birth control, which for the past 60 years, this is the first time in human history that it's relatively convenient and reliable to be able to space out or defer childbearing. So we can defer or space out our childbearing, freeing up the females in our society to do other tasks and fulfill other roles. But we also have new ways of doing reproduction. Artificial insemination, made very convenient with the cooling and overnight delivery of a shipment from the donor. Surrogacy, and frozen sperm and frozen eggs, just to name a few of the technologies. Let's talk about artificial insemination because it's the first reproductive technology that more or less moves away from the old-fashioned way of intercourse, and it asks some interesting questions. The first case is from the 1800s, and it's a situation where the husband doesn't want children, and he's had an arrangement with his wife. He would withdraw very early when they had intercourse, and she would perform oral sex on him. She wanted a baby, and so she, without his knowledge, managed to get herself pregnant using a syringe. Sans the needle, of course, I am assuming. A very doable thing, and if you don't know, depending on the motility of the sperm and the medium in which that sperm is swimming around in, and what I mean about the medium, whether it be in the women's reproductive tract or in the case of modern technology, it's cooled semen that is suspended in a medium, well then that semen, the sperm, it can easily last 48 to 72 hours. And there are some reports of viable sperm to about 60 hours, and that would be up to 5 days. So anyway, back to the story. So now there's this woman in the 1800s. She's pregnant. She's had intercourse with her husband, but he has been trying to eliminate any possibility of her getting pregnant. And the framework of this situation is that they're a married couple. So now you have to ask yourself, has there been consent on his behalf? So let's stop here and ponder this for a minute. So what we've got here is a central question, and that is, can the state hold the father liable when there's no conscious consent on his part? And to decide this question, the starting point is, what's the state's interest here? Why does the state need to be involved in this decision? Well, the end run here is that the state doesn't want to be liable for the financial support of the child. So they're going to go back to the people that are responsible for starting that life, and the state's going to want to make them be held accountable. So the basic premise here is that the state has an interest, and because the state has an interest, who can and cannot have children becomes a matter of state's concern. Artificial insemination would be the oldest of technologies. And that means that societies had some time to determine what to do with a non-traditional procreative situation. So in the case of the 1800s artificial insemination situation, the father was held accountable. But what about the more common situation where there's a physician or a clinic that inseminates the woman? When that situation occurs, the idea is that the physician or the clinic breaks the nexus. Nexus meaning to link things together. That's Latin for things that are close together. So the idea is that the connection between the father and the child is broken via a physician or a clinic inseminating the mother. Then there is an interesting case that happened literally up the road from where I live, and I worked for the attorney that handled this case. A school teacher from Harrison County, Indiana, decided that she wanted to have a baby, and she asked a local farmer to be the dad, saying that the farmer was donating his sperm and that he was not going to be asked for child support. They had intercourse. No doctor or clinic was involved. Then she sued him for child support. What happened there was that the trial court held that the father was not liable, meaning that he didn't have to pay child support. But then it went on up to the Court of Appeals. They agreed with the trial court. So the farmer father, is still not being held liable. But then it went on up to the Indiana Supreme Court, and they reversed the former decisions, meaning that they held the father liable for child support. So even with the contract agreement, there's a strong supposition that fathers are held liable for their genetic materials. It all falls back on the idea that the state wants as much assurance possible that parents, and not the state, will take care of children. So the basic rule is that if the state has an interest in something, they will assure through the courts that their interest is advanced. And when thinking about the case of the school teacher and the farmer, the reasoning is that even though the future mother signed away her rights, the right to child support belongs to the child, not the mother. And you cannot sign away someone else's rights. There's no breaking of the nexus there. The father's liable. But the other broad principle that I want you to get here is the idea that technology raises questions that have not been dealt with before. New opportunities, new ways of doing things, and we have to grapple with how that changes norms and social arrangements. Maybe even changes in the social institution at a very broad level too. Changing technology means changing opportunities and changing norms. Let's return to the idea of consent and fatherhood and the idea of responsibility for genetic material. There's a case of 4 teens, and yes, this is true. I get these cases out of a legal journal called the Reproductive Rights Reporter. So back to this case. 4 teens, they go out on a double date. Let's just say that Ann and Bill are in the front seat and Carol and David are in the back seat. They party it up and Ann and Bill have sex in the front seat, and then a little later Carol and David have sex in the back seat. Carol comes up pregnant and she sues David for paternity. They do a paternity test and David is not the father. Carol is adamant that no one else could be the father, and indeed she has not had sex with anyone other than David. I'm going to let you ponder this one for a while and not tell you the answer. Instead, I'll set something up via soft chalk so you can explore this a bit. Thinking in terms of feminist views, feminists would say that artificial insemination changes the relationship between men and women, and that it then diminishes men's role in reproduction and puts an emphasis on women's roles. And then that would beg the question as to whether lesbian and gay parents, meaning couples raising families or single individuals who either, as in the case of lesbians, use sperm donors, or in the case of gay, surrogacy contracts, which we'll talk about later, whether these family arrangements threaten the integrity of the family. And by integrity, I am not placing a value judgment on alternatives to traditional families. I just mean that do these arrangements threaten traditional norms and thereby cause concern for some conservatives? When these situations are challenged, they wind up in the courts, and the courts have to decide who has what rights and how will they be enforced. So artificial insemination cases raise policy issues that have to be considered. Should it be an unknown donor policy where the identity of the donor is not revealed? Should couples or women be allowed to donor shop and choose who the donor is going to be? Is the idea of limited fatherhood with some rights but not all rights a good policy? And, as in the case of the farmer and the teacher, the contract they created, can a biological parent relinquish rights before conception? And then also, how many parents should a child have? So technology creates these very unusual situations, non-traditional situations, and they become fairly complex relationships. In our next session, we'll be looking at some more cases that raise these types of interesting policy considerations because new technologies create new ways and opportunities for doing things.